But if we know that AMD is cheap, if we know that it's undervalued based on its own 5-year valuation, then I think we should be buying the security now. Buy the security now and buy shares as it goes down, build you a position over the long term, and watch the security ride back up to higher heights. What's going on, everybody? And welcome back to another episode of the Trade for Yourself podcast, where my mission here is very simple. I just want to help you learn how to trade and invest in the stock market for yourself. So make sure you please subscribe. Make sure you hit that notification bell so you can be in the know every single time that I drop an episode, okay? Look, I know that I have not dropped an episode in a while, but that's okay. 2025, that's going to change. And the one thing I want you to understand and just add a little bit of food for thought for you is this right here. If you've been doing something, but you haven't done it in a while, and it may have been months since you have done it, when you realize that, hey, I haven't done this for a while, but I need to get back consistent in it, just get back into it. Don't overthink it. Don't think about what other people have to say about you. Just get back into it. Start getting back on that horse and start doing what it takes to be consistent in doing that thing. So I'm getting back into it. I'm getting back into the Trade for Yourself podcast in 2025, and I'm going to continue to provide value to you all and explain to you about the stock market and explain to you about building wealth and explain to you about the companies that you need to be looking at for your long-term portfolio and actually doing some trading so you can make some money here in the stock market. I'm telling you right now, AMD Advanced Micro Devices is going to be the stock of 2025, and I'm going to explain that to you in so many words so you can understand it and so you can add this security to your portfolio so you can build some wealth. So let's talk a little bit about AMD. Okay, so who is AMD? Advanced Micro Devices, ticker symbol AMD on the New York Stock Exchange. They are a fabless semiconductor company, meaning that they design chips. They design chips for computers, and for data centers. CPUs and GPUs. The CPU, the central processing unit, which is the brain, and the graphics processing unit, which is the power. It gives you the computing power that you need for all of the AI applications that we need for the growing AI ecosystem from a hardware and software perspective for so many different things that we have going on in the world. Now, AMD is a company that is very, very cheap right now. It's very, very cheap right now. And I believe that institutional investors are going to be purchasing this company as we go into 2025. AMD is a top two player. When you look at NVIDIA, you've got NVIDIA and you've got AMD. And AMD is right there from a CPU and GPU perspective. And AMD is going to continue to be a leader in terms of the fabless semiconductor industry. I'm going to talk in this episode about what AMD can do, why it's a good company, and why you should be adding it to your portfolio. Let's get into it. I want to start off by looking at the last earnings report. And the first thing I want to tell you is that when you're looking at these earnings reports, you can go into Google. Google is your best friend, everybody, in terms of doing research, in terms of figuring out certain stocks and certain securities that you may want to invest in, and figuring out the information that you need. So all I did was type in AMD earnings. I scrolled down, and right here we've got our earnings calls and we've got our previous earnings calls. Now, AMD has been solid. They've been solid. They haven't been doing anything extraordinary from an earnings call perspective, but in the last earnings report, they beat on EPS and they beat on revenue. It was a solid beat. It wasn't anything that was extraordinary, which the market may have wanted, which may have contributed to the reason why the stock price has been down. But at the end of the day, the company is doing well and the company reported well in its earnings and the company is doing well in the segments of the business that matters, the growth segments of the business. And so now let's get into the earnings report and let's dive into that a little bit. Okay, so this is AMD's third quarter 2024 financial results, and I want to focus on these last two paragraphs right here. So it says, we delivered strong third quarter financial results with record revenue led by higher sales of EPYC and Instinct data center products and robust demand for our Ryzen PC processors, said AMD Chair and CEO Dr. Lisa Su. Looking forward, we see significant growth opportunities across our data center, client, and embedded businesses driven by the insatiable demand for more compute. So we're talking about data center revenue, right? That's what's going to be very, very important for this company moving forward. We are pleased with our execution in the third quarter, delivering strong year-over-year expansion in gross margin and earnings per share, said AMD Executive Vice President, Chief Financial Officer, and Treasurer John Hu. We are on track to deliver record annual revenue for 2024 based on significant growth in our data center and client segments. Again, remember what I was talking about in terms of being solid. The company is performing well in the businesses that perform that matter the most, which is the data center and client segments for this company. And that's what's very, very important for us to understand. Now we can look at the GAAP and the non-GAAP quarterly financial results, okay? And in terms of the GAAP stands for Generally Accepted Accounting Principles. So publicly traded companies have to report these financial results and they have to report them in a way that is acceptable to the SEC, the Security Exchange Commission. Let's focus on the GAAP. Okay, the GAAP is really what I want to focus on when we're talking about this. So we look at the revenue. The revenue was 6.8 billion, up 18% year over year. Gross profit was 3.4 billion, up 24% year over year. Gross margin was 50%, up 3 basis points year over year. Operating expenses were up 7% year over year. The operating income was up 223% year over year, which is very, very good. The operating income was up very significantly, which we should actually applaud them for being able to do that. Net income was up 158% year over year at 771 million, and diluted earnings per share was 47 cents per share, up 161% year over year. So when we look at the results on the GAAP and the non-GAAP, it's doing very, very well. When we break down the segment summary, right, the segments, the record data center segment revenue was 3.5 billion, up 122% year over year and 25% sequentially. So that means in Q2, pretty much Q3 was up 25% in 2024 over Q2 2024, which is very, very good, which is letting you know that the company is doing well in terms of its GPU shipments and its CPU sales. The client segment revenue was 1.9 billion, up 29% year over year and 26% sequentially, primarily driven by strong demand for Zen 5 AMD Ryzen processors. So the two segments that we care about the most, which really truly driving long-term growth, are performing well. The gaming segment revenue was 462 million, down 69% over year and 29% sequentially, primarily due to a decrease in semi-custom revenue. So we're talking about AMD produces, or they design, the chips for the Sony PS5 and also the Xbox, right? And the gaming segment is just down, and gaming overall is just not performing as well as it had been before the pandemic and things of that nature. The embedded segment was 927 million, down 25% year over year as customers normalized their inventory levels. But on a sequential basis, the revenue increased 8% as demand improved in several end markets. So embedded could be on an uptrend as we go into 2025. It's possible. The gaming segment is probably going to be muted, but at the same time, we have to focus on the data center and the client. That's what's really truly driving AMD's growth because that is just what the overall market is looking at towards growth at the end of the day. Now, let's focus on these two bullet points right here. I'm going to highlight both of them. So, AMD announced an agreement to acquire ZT Systems, a leading provider of AI and general purpose compute infrastructure for the world's largest hyperscale providers to expand the company's data center AI systems capabilities and accelerate deployment of AMD AI rack scale systems with cloud and enterprise customers. The acquisition is subject to regulatory clearance and other customary closing conditions and is expected to close in the first half of 2025. So what are we talking about here? We're talking about data center, right? Which the company is continuing to show that the company is trying to is that R&D, right? Research and development and acquiring companies that can help them continue to provide good service in terms of the data center segment, which is the number one segment of the business that is important to us. Also, AMD completed the acquisition of Silo AI to accelerate development and deployment of AI models on AMD hardware. Okay, so we have AI, and everybody wants to talk about AI, but we have the hardware and we have the software. So AMD designs the chips, right? AMD designs the chips that the data centers use. That's the hardware component, but you have to have the software on top of it to be able to unlock all of the possibilities and all of the compute. And so with AMD acquiring Silo AI, this is telling us that, okay, we're going to utilize the software. Okay, we're going to be able to accelerate the development and the deployment of the AI models on top of the hardware. You have to have the hardware, but you have to have the software right beside it on top of it to be able to unlock all of that compute power. In terms of the outlook, when we look at the outlook, this is solid outlook. Again, we're talking about the earnings being solid, right? It's not anything extraordinary, but it's solid. And for the fourth quarter of 2024, AMD expects revenue to be approximately 7.5 billion. At the midpoint of the revenue range, this represents year-over-year growth of approximately 22%, which is good, and sequential growth of approximately 10%. The non-GAAP gross margin is expected to be approximately 54%. So when we talk about revenue, the company is growing revenue year over year and is growing revenue sequentially quarter over quarter. So the company is consistently growing its revenue based on what the company is saying that it's doing from a data center perspective. The non-GAAP gross margin is expected to be 54%, which is solid. It's flat sequentially, but at the same time, that is solid gross margin, and the company is making good money. All right, everybody. So let's look at the balance sheet. And when we're investing in companies, we have to have companies that have strong balance sheets, right? Strong balance sheets to where their assets greatly outweigh their liabilities, and that's very, very important. We have to have companies with strong balance sheets, and AMD has a very, very strong balance sheet. So let's talk about the balance sheet a little bit. We can look at current assets and current liabilities. It's the first thing we look at when we talk about businesses. And let's explain that real quick. Total current assets, that's the money that is expected to come to a business within a 12-month time period. And the total current liabilities is money that's expected to go out of the business over a 12-month time period. And if we look at the total current assets are 18.7 billion dollars. The total current liabilities are $7.5 billion. So the total current assets dwarf our current liabilities more than double. Okay. We look at the total debt. our debt is 1.7 billion. Okay, that's our total debt, but our cash, when we look at our cash, we got 3.897 billion plus 647 million. So when you combine that, that's about 4.5 billion dollars in cash versus 1.7 billion dollars in debt. So the company has more than double the amount of cash than it does debt. The great Peter Lynch once said that it's very, very hard for a company to go out of business that has a low amount of debt. And so this company could pay off all of its debt today if it wanted to. And that's very, very strong when we're talking about a company. So when we look at the fundamentals of the company not only has good growth prospects in terms of the segments of its business, but the fundamentals in terms of the underlying fundamental metrics of the business is very, very strong. Okay, so let's talk about management for a second. Okay, Dr. Lisa Su. Dr. Lisa Su has been the leader of AMD for 10 years, and she is the Time Magazine CEO of the Year. This lets you know that everybody understands what a company has the ability to do. When we look at companies, we're always looking at management, and management is arguably the most important segment of the business because the CEO sets the standard. The CEO is the one that's in charge. The CEO is the one that lays out the strategic direction of the business. And this company has done very, very well underneath Dr. Lisa Su's leadership. The company, the stock return, let's talk about the stock return. The stock return is up 4,624.15% underneath her leadership. Now, what does that tell me? That tells me the company has done very, very well underneath her leadership. But now we have to ask ourselves the question, yes, Devon, you're telling me, man, the company's done very, very well underneath Dr. Lisa Su's leadership, and the stock price has grown over 4,600%. But for me, somebody that may not own AMD, does it have the ability to continue to do that? Let's look at some of the things that I see that can help AMD continue to grow and continue to be profitable, and the stock price will continue to grow in the years to come. Okay, so one thing I like to do is look at analyst price targets, and I would recommend everybody to open up an E-Trade brokerage account just to be able to look at these analyst price targets. And these analyst price targets are set over a 12-month time period. And it gives us a gauge, and it gives us what do the analysts who actually track this company daily, what do they think AMD is going to be able to do over a 12-month time span? And so the average price target is $184.52. That represents a 47.39% upside, which is very, very good. The high price target is $250, representing an almost 100% upside on the security. That's very, very important. But the low is $145, representing a 15.82% upside on the security. So what we can see from this, and what we can gauge from this, is that analysts believe that AMD is going to go up, and it's going to go higher than where it is. Even the lowest price target is still higher from where the stock is trading. So we can at least anticipate getting at least a 10% increase on our money when the lowest price target is 15.82%. But I think that we could get at least a 47% upside, if not a 99.7% upside, as we look at some other things that I'm going to show you here in just a bit. Now, we look at analyst consensus rating. So E-Trade likes to show these analysts and show what they like to, what their particular price target is, what their average return is for AMD, and what's the success rate for AMD. So this is a very, very recent recommendation. This recommendation was just over a week ago from Hans Mosesman from Rosenblatt Securities. He rated AMD as a buy, and the price target is $250. That $250 upside price target that I was talking about. He has an analyst average return at 50.70% and a success rate for AMD at 75%. This is very, very good to me. This is very, very interesting to me. $250 is something that I believe is actually achievable for this security. If we just look at where the security has been over the last 52 weeks, it is very, very possible that this security could get $250, which could be double your money if you are able to get into this security today or tomorrow before it breaks out, before investors begin to see the underneath value and see that this is cheap. Okay. Now we're looking at the average price target and things of that nature. Let's look at the revenue prospects and the profitability prospects for the security over the next few years. Okay, so let's look at the top line, right? The top line is our revenue. Okay. 2023 revenue was 22.7 billion. Estimate for 2024 is right at 25.6 billion. 2025, 32.5 billion. 2026, 40.2 billion. 2027, 47.7 billion. So we're talking about the revenue for the company almost doubling over a 5-year time span. Now, this is something that's very, very important because when we invest in companies and we're saying that we're going to buy this security and we're going to invest in it, we want to invest into companies that have the ability to grow over a 5-year time span. This is very, very good from a revenue perspective. Okay. Let's look at earnings for a second. Earnings on a per share basis, annual earnings on a per share basis. 2023, $2.65. 2024, we're looking at $3.32 as an estimate. 2025, $5.06. 2026, $7.08. And 2027, $8.78. So we're talking about earnings more than doubling over a 5-year time span. Now, let me ask you a question. Are you willing to invest into a company that's going to double its earnings over a 5-year time span and almost double the revenue over a 5-year time span? These are the things that we look at when we're talking about investing into businesses. When we want to build wealth, and at the end of the day, we're trying to build wealth. Building wealth is about equity. It's about equity. It's about ownership. It's about ownership into businesses that have the ability to grow. AMD is going to grow because of what the company has been able to do, because of being able to do well from a CPU and GPU standpoint, and also being able to do well for its clients. Microsoft, Amazon, Google, Oracle, and others is doing well. And when we see the earnings and we see the expectations for the revenue and the profitability backing it up, and we see the balance sheet being solid, and we see the management being solid, this is telling me everything that I need to know when I'm talking about, do I want to invest in AMD? Yes, AMD is going to do well. Now, before we get into the charts, let's talk about the valuation. The valuation. What do we believe AMD stock is worth? And what I want to focus on, I want us to focus on this chart right here, this valuation chart for AMD. Now, PE forward 12 months. So PE is price to earnings ratio. It tells us how much you're going to pay for every $1 of a company's profit. It essentially tells you how much a company is worth. And we want to look at this from different perspectives. Now, when you look at sub-industry and you look at sector and you look at S&P 500, from a valuation perspective, AMD is going to be more expensive than all of those 3 columns. It's going to be more expensive, but AMD is consistently more expensive than the S&P and the broader market. because tech stocks are generally more expensive. But let's look at AMD from a valuation perspective. And where is AMD from a valuation perspective over its 5 year mark? Okay. The 5 year high is $106.90, $106, 106.90. This is not dollars. This is just a number. Okay. This is 106.90 for 5 year high, 5 year low, 13.77, 5 year median is 41.63. So over a 5 year time span, the valuation of AMD is around 41.63, but the current valuation is 30.6. So this tells me that AMD is discounted pretty good based on what the 5 year valuation is. So AMD is cheap based on what it's normally trading at from a PE perspective. That's good because when you look at certain stocks and you look at certain securities, you want to invest into companies that are cheap. And right now, AMD is cheap based on its own valuation. But now let's look at the charts and let's see how is AMD cheap on a price, a nominal perspective. Okay, everybody. So let's look at the chart for AMD. And this is a year-to-date chart, the 2024 performance for AMD. Now, I am recording this on December 29th, and we're looking at this on December 29th. And when we look at this, I have a few things I want you to look at. The gold line is the 200-day moving average, and the blue line is the 50-day moving average. So the 200-day moving average crossed above the 50-day moving average, which indicates a death cross, right? Indicates a death cross. Now, the golden cross would be the inverse of that, the 50 crossing over the 200. But AMD is experiencing a death cross. AMD is experiencing a series of lower highs and lower lows. We made a high of $227.30, but we've been trending down. We had a lower high of around 187, right? And we came down another lower high, and we're making lower lows. So we're making lower highs and lower lows. So when a stock is making lower highs and lower lows, the stock is broken. It's a broken stock. The stock is not performing well. It's not being rewarded. It's continuing to go down. Okay. So the stock is broken, but this is what we need to ask ourselves. Is AMD a broken stock or is it a broken company? I would argue that AMD is a broken stock, but it's a strong company because we looked at all the metrics. We looked at the revenue. We looked at the profitability. We looked at the segments of the business and what it's doing. The CEO is the 2024 Time Magazine CEO of the Year. The fundamentals are strong. AMD is actually a part of the fastest supercomputer in the world. AMD is doing everything that it needs to do from a fundamental perspective. The only thing is that the stock is broken. But when a company is strong, when the company is a strong company and you have a broken stock, that is what provides you the most opportunities for being able to make money in the stock market. Let's look at the monthly chart. The monthly chart. But if we look at the monthly chart of AMD, AMD is making higher highs and higher lows. We got a high right here of around $164.46. We have a low right here around this 50-week moving average. We're still moving higher. We had this high right here of 227.30, and now we're making a higher low. I believe we are making a higher low right here around the 50 period moving average. We almost touched it. We got as low as $117.90. But the 50 period moving average was $112.84. So what am I telling you here? Could AMD get down to this 50 period moving average? Yes, that's very, very possible. It's very, very possible for AMD to continue to do that. Why is that possible for AMD to continue to do that? Because if we look at the daily chart, we see that AMD is making lower highs and lower lows. So it could bottom out at a strong support level. It could go as low as $112, which looks like pretty good support, or it could come down all the way to 95, 93. That's a possibility. But I would entertain, as market entertainment would say, the group that I'm a part of, I would say that I would rather you start buying the security now because the company is cheap on its own valuation based on a 5-year metric. And I would argue that you should, it's more so about time in the market, not timing the market. We don't want to time the market and say that AMD is going to come down to $93.54 because it might not do that. It might not do that. It might have bottomed out at $117.90 and it might go back up to 227. That's a possibility. Or it could continue to come down. But if we know that AMD is cheap, if we know that it's undervalued based on its own 5-year valuation, and I think we should be buying the security now. Buy the security now and buy shares as it goes down, build you a position over the long term, and watch the security ride back up to higher heights. At the end of the day, you need to be adding AMD to your long-term portfolio because this is a company that's going to perform well in 2025 and beyond. It's very, very cheap. It has good fundamentals. It has solid earnings. It has good growth prospects in data center and its client segments, which are the segments that are most important for the business. And those are the segments of the business that are growing the most right now when we look at AI and we look at the data center aspects across the landscape in America. I want you to understand that we have to invest in companies when they are cheap. The great Warren Buffett once said that you have to be fearful when others are greedy, and you have to be greedy when others are fearful. This is a time when we need to be purchasing a broken security that still has strong fundamentals so we can build our wealth over the long term and have a solid portfolio. As always, I appreciate you all for tapping into another episode of the Trade for Yourself podcast. Please like, please subscribe. Let me know what you think about AMD as a security. Let me know if you already own AMD as a stock, and if you think that I've got something wrong or if you think I've got something right. Please reach out to me in the comments and let me know if you would like to know anything additional about AMD or if you think that this is exactly what you need to be able to invest into this company. As always, remember, don't pay for it, trade for it. I'm going to tap in with y'all in the next episode.